Let's look at JavaScript arrays. Arrays are a way to hold list information. So it's like a list-like that you can hold multiple items within the same variable definition. There's some examples over at the Mozilla Developer Network, so MDN, and they've got more information about what arrays are, how they work, and how you can create arrays. So let's go ahead and create some arrays within our JavaScript code. So open up the editor, and we'll also minimize the window here on the left hand side, and I'll also minimize it on the right hand side, the browser window, and then the JavaScript code on the left hand side. So first of all, let's create our first array. So just call it RA1, RAR1, and arrays are defined with square brackets. You can console log out the contents of your array by logging it out into the console. So right now we've just got a blank array, so there's nothing within that array yet. And you can also, when you are declaring your array, you can add in some values in there. So these values can be strings values, they can be number values, they can be Boolean values, and there can also be additional arrays in there as well. So you can have another array within an array. So when you output that into the console, it outputs it nice and neatly. And you'll also notice that within the array there are some default values. So it does have a default length. So this array has 5 items in it, starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how we can get and retrieve the values that are contained within the array by using the index value. They are 0 based. So that means that the first item has an index value of 0. So if we wanted to return back the value of 100, what would be the index value that we would use? Output it into the console. So you can pause the video and give it a try, and I'll show you the solution right now. So the solution for that is, if we want to retrieve back just the value of 100, we can just define it using the index value. So when we are creating arrays, there are also different ways that we can add to the array, and we can loop through the items of the array. And also, if we were to do an array and we want to update the value of the item with index value of 2, and we want to update it to something like test, a string value, we can change and update the array, and that's going to update the contents of the array itself. Also, another thing to note when it comes to arrays, you're probably wondering, okay, well, what if I do this, and if I use an index value that doesn't exist yet? So if I do 100, and if I add this as a value of 100, and then output the contents of the array, you'll find that the actual length of the array is going to be 101, because remember, they are 0 based, and it has a bunch of blank empty items within the array that have all the index values from 5 to 99. So that's what happens when you do this declaration of the array. There's also several ways that if you want to clear out the array, you can clear the contents of the array. So you can set it and take the length value and set the length to 0, and that will empty out the contents of the array. So over here on line number 8, we've got nothing within the array because we've cleared out all of the values of the array. So that's one way that you can clear the array. I'm going to just comment that out. And another thing to note about arrays, so if you were to create another variable and assign array 1 to that value, and if you output the contents of array 2, you'll find that it does have the same contents as the first array. But what happens if you update some of the values that are contained within that array? So if we were to reassign to the item with the index value of 4, and I'll just add in a string value of new value, and then we output the current value of array 2 and open that up in the console, we see that 4 has a new value. And also, what if we see what's contained within array 1? We also have 4 as the new value. And that's the reason why we can use const and we don't have to use let for the array, because it's tying the array to a particular memory location. So when you update the array, you're actually not updating and duplicating the array. What you're doing is when you're assigning to array 2, array 1, you're just linking that same memory location. So these two ultimately tie to the same object. If we update one, it's going to update on both of them. So if we do want to make a duplicate of this current array, and I'm going to actually remove out this one that are within the array. So this is our latest version of the array, and you'll find that array 1 and array 2 are going to be the same. I'll copy them over and they're going to output the same values. So after we've made the change to array 2, the values of both of them are going to be identical. So if you do want to separate them, there is a few ways that you can do it. One of the ways is to just loop through all of the values. So instead of assigning it to array 2, let's create a new array, and we'll create array number 3, and this is going to be a blank array. And then we can loop through each one of the values within either array 1 and using for each, and loop through the value. We can get the index value, and I'll console log out each one of the elements so that we can see what's contained within the array. So as we loop through, we can simply take to array 3 and use the index value and assign whatever the value is contained within the element. So ultimately that will create a brand new array that will populate the new array, and it will also keep it separate from the values. So this will give you one way to make updates to the content of the array. And if you change that, it's going to come out as the changed value, but the two original arrays are going to stay the same because they're no longer tied to that same memory location. The nice thing about arrays is that they come with default built-in methods, so you can do a lot, from everything from getting the length to also to adding to the array. So if you wanted to add to an array, let me clear this out. I'll clear out the console. There's a number of ways to add to the array. We saw that we can just assign with the index value, but if we don't know the index value, we can as well get the length and then just add 1, or just use the length value to append to the end. There's also better ways to do that. So if we were to take array 1 and we want to add content to the end, we can push the content in. So call that the new value. And now when we output the array, we've added a new value at the end. So if we were to clear that and take array 1 and push test2 into it, it returns back the length. So the callback is going to be the new length of the array. And then to output into the console, we'll see that we've added another value at the end. There's also, if we do to array 2, and if we push, I'll just call it test5, now there's 8 items in the array. And if we list out array 1, because those array 1 and array 2 are still going to be referencing the same array, that's why we're able to push into one, push into the other, and they're both going to get the same value being added into them. You can also remove an item from the end of the array. So if you take the array and if you use pop, this is the method that's going to remove out the last item in the array, and the callback is actually going to be whatever the value was that was contained within there. So if we do pop again, we're going to remove that last item, and if we output the contents of the array, you'll find that that last item is now gone, but it's being returned back on the callback. So if, for instance, you want to use that value, I'll just create a value 1 and take from array 1 and run the pop, and we'll console log out the contents of val1. What do you think the contents are going to be? They're going to be whatever the last item was. So we added to the array with the push, and then we use pop to remove from the array, and that's where we got the value being returned back in the console there at the end. There's also, if you want to add an item to the beginning of the array, there's the option to shift content into there. So selecting the array name and then shift, and whatever you want to add and it's actually unshift to add, and shift will remove it. So unshift, and whatever value we want to add, I'll just add this 1. And let's list that out. So we've added an item in the beginning. If we want to remove it, we can use the shift. And much as we saw with the pop, it's going to return back the value that's being returned back, so the callback value. And if we're adding to it, then we just simply get the array length being returned back. So if we do a value 2, and if we do shift, it's going to take the first item out of the array and it's going to return it back. So if you do want to use it, you can pick it up within the callback and make use of it. So there's the value that we took out and that we've added into the array. Another really useful method, and this is the one that you could use that's better than using the loop in order to output the contents of the array and duplicate array. So we can set up another array holder. So I'll call this array4, and using the array and the map method, taking the elements and then doing a response of the elements. So if we do a console log of the contents of the element, and then whatever we return back, that's going to be what the new value is going to be within array4. So let's console log the contents of array4. So that's recreated the array, and as you see within line 29, it loops through the contents of the array. So we've got string test false new value. So that's the current contents of the array, and it also adds them into this new array4. So if we have array4 and if we update one of the values to start, it's not going to affect the first arrays because this again is duplicating the array. So essentially it's giving us a quick way to do a cloning of the array. There's also a shorter way to write this, and I'll just add this in for reference sake, that we can take the array1 and use map, and whatever the value is of that current item in the array, we just simply return it back. So this is probably the shortest way that you can clone an array. And then of course you can console log out the value of array5. So I know we've covered quite a bit and fairly quickly about arrays. So before the next lesson, give it a shot, create an array, add in some values into the array. You can do it right off the bat when you're defining the array, or you can add to it. You can manipulate the array by using the push, the pop, the unshift, and the shift. And actually I'll just do an array1 unshift so that we have that within the reference. So you can manipulate the contents of the array, try it out, and output it into the console just to get more familiar with arrays, because arrays are going to be really important as we go through the upcoming lessons in understanding and working with our JSON data that's coming back from the server.